Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Stacy. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. This is part of a series called In Conversation that you will have found on my website. And I started these conversations because I wanted to have the chance to share the knowledge of people who and the experiences of people who I have enjoyed talking with over the years and who I have learned from and who I've admired. And so I myself am a pedagogical partner with adults in this area. I live in Nova Scotia on the East Coast, and I do many things. I'm an author with Red Leaf Press, and I try to collaborate with educators across North America and around the world on things of interest to them, including emerging curriculum and documentation, reflective practice, and those types of things. So today I'm really happy to have Deb Curtis with us. Very privileged to have Deb. Hi, Deb. Thank you for being here. So Deb and I, although I am on the East Coast and Deb's on the West Coast of the United States, we've met on many occasions over the years. Deb came to Nova Scotia one time with Margie Carter and did a big event here with us. I lived in the United States for a while and we would meet up at conferences and have brief conversations. We both published with Red Leaf Press over the years, and we both attended Pacific Oaks College at different times and came under the sort of mentorship of Elizabeth Jones, who we will miss dearly. Um, so
Didn't
Deb,
we do something at your program in the US too?
yes, you did. That's right.
Yeah,
You did a big
John was
event.
there. Yeah,
Yes.
I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you came to New Hampshire Technical Institute
yeah,
and
yeah,
you talked with our educators and our students. It was a big event. And you came over to the center, the lab school where I worked. Yeah, that was a great day. So we've had
yeah.
lots of different
We have
contacts
lots
over.
of little intermittent
Yeah,
connections.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
been great. And so, Deb and I have talked about all sorts of things over the years and are of like mind. And when we were preparing, when we were deciding what we wanted to talk about today, I think everybody who knows Deb is very familiar with her work with adults, written many books about reflecting in communities of practice, training teachers, designs for living and learning, and many other books. So I think most people are very familiar with Deb's work with adults, but today we thought it would be interesting to talk about Deb's work with toddlers, because I don't know that everybody knows about Deb's work with toddlers, and toddlers are a really fascinating group. So I wanted to start off with Deb. Um, you have said that you are passionate about working with toddlers, and I wonder, where do you think that passion for working with toddlers, where does that come from? What is it about them, about toddlers?
Well, the secret is I've always really worked primarily with children, and my work with adults has grown from that. I consider myself like Betty, a kid watcher and telling stories about children. Um, so I have to say it's in my work on reflective practice and my own practice that I came to toddler work.
Mhm.
Uh, because I'd been working in preschool. I went back to the classroom after many years of just working with adults in college settings, and I did practicum. So I'd go to classrooms with teachers when they were working, and I was really disturbed because the kinds of things I was suggesting, people were telling me they couldn't do
Mhm.
because there were too many kids, too many rules, too many this. It's just like I got so much pushback about my ideas about seeing children and using what you see to grow your practice. So I decided, well, I got to go do it again because I can't keep doing this work without that as, where I can relate to what they're talking about. And I have to say, they were correct. There's
Mhm.
a lot of do's and don'ts and a lot of pressure. Uh, Something I've never enjoyed about the work. But going back really gave me a lot of insight. And, I tried to think about, well, how do we counteract all these, pressures and still put our relationship with children at the center of what we do? So that's how I went back with preschool children. And I did that for probably 8 or 10 years back after years of doing that earlier in my career. And I got to this point. uh, with the preschoolers, where particularly the 4-year-old boys make me crazy. And I got how amazing they were. And I would be like, amazingly confounded by how they behaved and how incredible they were. But I found myself like sighing and saying, really, do we really have to do this again? Because I would try to follow their lead. This is particularly the year of 9/11.
Oh,
And I worked in a program that have a lot of children from the military bases nearby where I worked. And so everybody was acting out armies and they knew so much about that. And they wanted to, make guns from my loose parts place. And I was like, okay. I
yeah.
get this.
Mm,
And it's just not for me, is what it wasn't about them. And I
mhm.
tell this story to educators because I think that's so important that if you find yourself saying no and being frustrated, it's not about the kids, it's about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I figured out this isn't for me.
Mhm.
So I actually went back to work with a colleague of mine in Seattle who was starting this big, beautiful Reggio program. And I worked in their infant room and toddler room. And it was like, yes, this,
You found your
this
spot.
is where I'm supposed to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
because I love that toddler brain. I think I still have a toddler brain, which is oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's do that. And it's always this incredible sort of desire to like learn everything and engage deeply. And that's where I started saying people talked about children have no attention span. And
Mm,
what I realize is they have attention for everything. It's
yeah,
a gift. And that's true. I've studied brain development now, and it's all about that, right? It's all about seeking everything and new things make you excited and interested. So that's what got me back in the toddler sphere. And I just love being with them. It's so profound and it gives me hope for humans because we're born with so many gifts.
yeah.
And you see that in children under 3, it's the most powerful time of life. So
And
that's how I got there.
and and you develop such a passion for it. And I'm interested when you say, you saw toddlers as engaging deeply with the world. And I think there's a sort of misconception about toddlers in society in general, that toddlers have a very short attention span. And therefore, what are you going to do with them? They're so busy, they don't engage with anything. And you and I think, have seen the opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see them engaging deeply.
Yes.
So
And
what does
it's
that look?
attention for everything. That's the
Yeah.
way to think of it as a competence, not as
Yes.
a distraction. They're not
Yes.
distracted,
Mm.
they're attracted.
Yeah.
New and interesting things in the
Yeah.
world. So
Yeah.
uh, I love that. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's fun to be with them.
Being with toddlers could never be boring,
No,
ever. I mean, it's just, as you say, they're interested in the world. Everything is new to them. Everything is interesting.
yeah.
And how
And
could
I've
that
been,
ever be tiresome? But we have to, so when we think about that, their interest in everything, their curiosity about everything, how do you engage with toddlers? What do you see as your role in that
well, first of
big
all,
curiosity?
I have to acknowledge that it's not easy work.
Mm,
Because I sometimes, when I'm in a group of toddlers, all toddlers, all one to 2.5 year olds, I think, who decided to do this, right? Because it is really a huge task to
mhm.
get us through the day with diapers and eating
Yeah,
and playing and cleanup and, safety. And because they do have all those things, they pinch each other and all of that is also true, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I get it. And I feel really lucky because I've worked with people in my toddler rooms that are willing to do that work when
yeah,
you know, I have this great story to tell about one of my colleagues. And I always am so grateful to her because she was the one that made sure we did the next thing. And I
mm,
was always being in the moment. So maybe that's the first idea is how do you find a partner that you can share this responsibility and someone who's willing to keep the group moving and enjoys that role. There are a lot of adults out there that do like to be in
Hmm.
charge and that. And then someone who says, "Hey, wait, let's stop for a minute." So I have this great story. I actually opened Lori Baird and Anne Marie Coglin's new book with an intro where I tell this story of we're coming in from outside and we're all in this little entryway that we have, and we have a shoe basket where everybody puts their shoes in before you go inside. And we were supposed to go in quickly because it's lunchtime. You got to wash your hands and do diapers because after lunch is going to be nap, and all of that is happening.
Yeah.
So my colleague was really, let's get going, let's get going. Well, one of the kids, Malcolm, decided to pick up the shoe basket, empty it, and put it on his head. So my response was, "Whoa, look at Malcolm," because everybody was really interested, to see through this basket and to be enclosed in it, which I've since come to learn about schema theory, which
Mhm.
is enclosure is a big
Yeah.
repetitive action for brain development. Anyway, so I paused in that moment and I could tell my colleague was, what is she doing now? Because they
Hmm.
have that reaction to me sometimes. Uh, and I said, "You go ahead, you go ahead and take the kids in there, and I'll just, move the other ones along." So the kids who wanted to stay, we each took a turn putting the basket on our head, and then everyone helped put the shoes back in, and we went in. But I can see, right? It's time for lunch. The shoes are
Hmm.
dirty. You've got them on your head. There's going to be germ, all those things. That's also true.
Yes.
For me, the joy is pausing in this moment to see this interesting idea.
Yeah.
All the children were interested in it, right? They
Yeah.
connected. So that's the other thing I've been really seeing is how children have this really deep desire and a lot of ability to be in relationship. And we often don't notice it. It's small little moments, and I've been doing a lot of reading about it. And if we make those moments visible to ourselves and to them, that's how sociability and compassion and helpfulness grow. And if we stop or try to, teach them, it undermines those
Yeah.
natural abilities. So
Yeah.
just this moment was it was a small, but it was important for all of those reasons, right? Brain development, connection,
Yeah.
delight in the world,
Yeah.
all of that.
Curiosity, being with each other in a group. You make me think about, when we say to pause and let the routine go a little bit and, let go and enjoy those moments. For me, I've done a lot of work with documentation, and I think it's so important to document, even with just some photographs, if you've got time for nothing else, to photograph those moments, to remember, to pay attention and to honor those moments, because as you say, they're often overlooked in the rush of routines. They're often overlooked and we don't see the joy in them. But perhaps if we had a little bit of documentation to go back to at the end of the day, we would be able to really appreciate those moments and let ourselves relax a little bit, let ourselves go a little bit. The routines are there. Those things have to be attended to, but also being present in those joyful moments is so
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Well, and I feel so strongly about that because in thinking about documentation, you make these decisions like, what
Mhm.
am I going to capture and
Yeah.
why? And a lot of that again becomes the have to do
Yes.
list,
Yeah.
right? And I got to get this, and it
Mhm.
loses that idea
Yeah.
of what can I see that I love? What can I see that I want to
Yeah.
share? How can I show children's remarkable abilities in the world? Because I truly believe the story you tell is how you're going to live, right? That story, not just in documentation, but first you're telling it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
And the story you tell is like, I'm going to live in this delight of toddlers. And that's what I encourage people to do. You can love it if you stop to pause and think, why do I love it?
Yeah.
And then you capture these stories for yourself to show it back to the children. So that story grows, right? And then you share it with your community, the families, uh, the other staff you work with. And then I've been really fortunate, and so have you, to share the stories in a wider audience. And I think that's what people resonate with is the stories and the moment.
Absolutely. And I
Uh,
think maybe we both got some of that from Betty Jones
oh, yeah,
because
totally.
she
I
was
totally give her credit.
totally all about the stories that
Yeah,
she started with her very first book, you know, and books like The Play's the Thing with Gretchen Reynolds. Um, it was all about the stories which made things come alive. And I've used that, as have you, in our own work. We've used that storytelling piece. And last night I was actually working with a group of educators and we were doing some documentation. It was all very hands-on and we were developing documentation, but I tried to take it away um, from being completely about the children and saying and starting with the idea of what is of interest to you, what gives you joy about this thing
yeah,
that you have photographed, what gives you joy, what are you interested in? Because I want educators to recognize that, to recognize that joy and to be able to document that as well as what's happening with the children. I think we have to spread the joy and the knowledge that we bring to our work. And documentation is just one way of doing that, but dialogue with other educators is equally as important, you know, to have the time to talk about this with others, hugely important. How many educators get the time during the day to talk with each other? Hardly ever,
yeah.
in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's if I say anything about my work as an adult educator, that's the part I really want to emphasize is that you have all the power in the room over yourself, over the kids, over the light, over when we're going to do what material. You have all the power. And how do you take that seriously? And how do you notice what you love? Notice
mhm,
what you're interested in uh, about the children. Notice the children's competence and things that you think are amazing, because that's going to color everything you do,
yeah,
right? If you're always looking for what's the next task or who's, breaking the rules or who's pinching who, that's
yeah,
all happening too. And
yeah,
you have to attend to it. But really, the way for quality is for you as a grown up to see yourself in that space and to see what you care about and see how you can meet up. I love this is from Lillian Katz. It's the idea of how can we meet up with children's minds on things that are interest to both of us.
yeah.
And that's a reciprocal relationship.
The
So
collaboration, yeah,
yeah,
totally a
exactly.
collaboration.
And,
Yeah.
there's this huge debate between process versus
Mm,
product and the teachers having no role or the teachers taking
mm,
total control. And I don't think it's that easy. It's a constant, like, decision-making process, a constant dance, and it takes
constant.
practice. That's why it's called reflective practice. You have
Yes.
to practice it
Yeah.
and slow down and think
I,
about that.
so, we're talking a lot these days about slow pedagogy, and I wonder in your own toddler environments that you have developed and worked in, um, how you use the environment, how you see the agency of the environment and the effect that it has on toddlers. How do you begin to think about an environment for toddlers, whether it's the physical environment or part of the environment is also the routines within it. So
Right.
how do you juggle that and how do you think about setting up environments for toddlers?
Well, I go back to Betty, and this
Mhm.
is with darn, I'm not Sylvia.
Sylvia Chard?
No,
No.
no,
Sylvia Kind?
Prescott.
Oh, Prescott, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Liz Prescott, yeah.
Liz Prescott. Anyway, they initially wrote a book. I actually talked to Betty about this later, and she didn't remember that they'd coined this phrase,
Oh,
and they called it structures for openness.
oh,
Have
okay.
always used that idea that you create a structure, right, that helps
Hmm.
contain and includes things you value and includes, the routines and what's available. And then you try to create it so that different people can enter into this structure in an open way. So
Mhm.
I always found that such a useful concept for thinking about environments I create for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Not just toddlers, but it's a really important one. And then I try to think about rather than, we have this whole learning center stuff that people get so attached to, you got to keep that there and you got to do, and I try to think about learning zones. Like, how
Mhm.
can you make sure you have these zones
Mhm.
of experience rather than learning centers? So, if you think about what toddlers love, they move their bodies all the time. So, if you don't have at least half of your room about moving your body in a way that will be okay with you, that you're not freaking out, and inviting to them, you will constantly be a police, right? Or the lifeguard.
And you will be stressed within your
Yeah.
environment.
And
You'll be constantly stressed.
that's true for preschoolers too.
Yeah.
We've learned so much about that with the whole work of Angela Hanscom on, balance and barefoot and this incredible desire to move because your brain seeks it to help
Yeah.
you. Kids who don't get it, actually, we're harming them. They end up in,
We see that in elementary schools where
yeah,
children are forced to sit still and they need to, some kids need to pace at the back of the room. They need to sit on a
yeah, and
ball
they
and
didn't get to do
move.
it. She says, we
Yeah.
put them in chairs, we make
Yeah.
them, tie them in and
Yeah.
sit still and listen.
Mm.
Indoors, pretty much in early childhood programs all day, maybe
Yeah.
a half hour of active play, and they end up in elementary school, primary grades, and their brains haven't developed for
Mm.
attention, for self-regulation, emotional regulation, and they have to get up and anyway. So
Mm.
that to me is huge, right?
Yeah.
You have to have
Movement.
a big space for movement for toddlers and for preschoolers.
Hmm.
And everywhere I go, that's what I recommend in the work that I've done. And when people do it, it totally changes the dynamic of a room because there's a place that children can go and use that incredible instinct to move. And when you move, it actually calms you. That's
Yes.
what they've
Yeah.
noticed. Calming,
Yeah.
bumping into the wall makes
Hmm.
you calm.
Hmm.
That's your
Yeah.
proprioceptive sense that, oh, okay, that's why we hug. That's
Mhm.
why we have yoga. That's why they give kids heavy backpacks because
Yeah.
that pressure
Yeah.
helps. So that's how I think about it, a place for movement. And then, this dump and fill. How do you
Yeah.
create an environment for dump and fill rather
Yeah.
than not there, don't dump that
Yeah.
because you'll just be frustrated all day, right?
And
Sensory investigation is another huge place of, and how do you have that everywhere from the sink where they wash their hands
mhm.
to places that they can explore with transforming things, that kind of stuff. And then the thing I've been really paying attention to lately is this whole social piece and understanding that children are naturally gifted for relationships, and
Mm.
we have to understand that. And people don't believe that. They think you have to teach kids social skills. And like I said earlier, the research suggests is that when we try to teach them, we undermine their natural abilities. So then I try to think, how do I have places where children come together easily and like little benches where you can sit with a couple
Little
friends? Yeah,
nooks, little nooks.
yeah,
Little,
exactly.
yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
a huge, and then materials that they uh, see and join in together, because that's another thing you see all the time with toddlers. They don't do a lot of conversation verbally, but you can see how they play together because they recognize these repeated actions in play from schema theory, right? They
Yeah.
recognize jump and fill. Oh, I know that. I'll do that. They recognize enclosure. Oh, yeah, I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It
So
feels
that's
good.
what invites them to play, and they already are watching each other every second. So if you create opportunities for them to do things that they recognize in each other, oh, you want to climb on that? So do I. Then you will have this incredible cooperative environment too. So I think it's kind of easy, actually.
Yeah.
to create an environment
Well,
for toddlers.
you've worked it through. You've learned this from all your practice over the years and worked it through. And I have to wonder or ask the question, what is being taught about this in our early childhood sort of training, pre-service training institutions. I think it's important for educators of adults to be recognizing, you know, more the needs of infants and toddlers and their need for movement. And then that environment is going to look a little, and preschool children is going to look a little different than maybe what we've been previously trained to do. And I think
Well,
our field is constantly evolving. I mean, you mentioned schema theory. Some years ago, when I was working at New Hampshire Technical Institute, I was director of the lab school, and our preschool room, which you actually visited, had a period of time where the children in there, it must have lasted for a month. And I have to hand it to the teachers in that room, that team. They let it go because they let it happen. Because what was happening was dump and fill in huge baskets. Everything went into the basket. Lego and blocks and dolls and everything went into the baskets, moved to another part of the room and dumped out into a big pile, that whole pile thing that
mhm.
children sometimes do. This was before schema theory was recognized or studied. This was way
Or
a
yeah,
long time ago.
before we found it, I think
Yeah,
people studied.
we didn't know what to call it. We started calling it the traveling classroom because
Uh-huh.
everything in that classroom traveled. And thank goodness for that. We did document it because we were puzzled by it. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what to call it or the why behind it. And the children were verbal, but they couldn't explain the why behind it either. They just liked it. And so we just had to go with it. And you can imagine the cleanup time at the end of the morning, was incredibly long. But that was a process too that we had to work through. And so
And toddlers like to help, so cleanup, they can help.
absolutely,
A lot
absolutely.
easier for
But
them
this
than
was that dump
preschoolers.
and fill was with 4 and 5 year olds.
Yeah,
It wasn't with toddlers. So
yeah.
we can't attach age ranges to this type of thing. You mentioned, you were disturbed at first, when you were going into centers or working with groups of staff, that you would have ideas and there would be pushback, if people didn't want to go there, or where do you think that came from? That sort of pushback of uh, um, in opposition to your ideas, and that people felt that they couldn't do this, this responsiveness. So do you think some
I,
of that has to do with disposition, or is this a societal sort of administrative, rules oriented type of thing?
yeah, it's huge, isn't it? I feel
Yeah,
like it's something that we both wrestled with our entire careers, which for me is over 50 years now, right?
yeah,
And I think, one of the sources is this, I think it's the Christian view that we're born evil into sin and we have to be fixed, right? That starts with, we don't see competence, right? We've sort of heard this story and it's still out there, right? The idea that people are bad and we have to
yeah,
make sure there are rules to make them behave. And,
yeah,
that's one side of story. That's true. Humans are incredible and they're horrible and they're compassionate and they're mean. So again, to me, this is about what story are we going to grow? So I think the story that's been growing forever and ever and ever in my life is this idea that people are bad and you need to fix them.
yeah,
And starting with children, you got to train them and discipline them and blah, 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 which is one story to tell. And it's not wrong, right? There are
mhm,
those things. So that's one of them. And then I think there's a lot of commercial interests
yeah,
that sell those things, right?
yeah,
Here's this thing to teach, to fix,
yeah,
you know, there's curriculum things
mhm,
that people are selling that they make a lot of money off of
yeah.
our profession when we don't make any when we're teachers.
And when you say to someone as a publisher, when you say to someone, here is this package, and if you buy this package, it will fix everything in your classroom and everything will run smoothly and everybody will be happy. How inviting is that?
Yeah.
If only it was that simple. But as you say, people are making a lot of money from those types of
Yeah.
packages.
Yeah. It
The
really,
promise everything.
yeah. And then they turn it into assessments. I won't name
Right.
names, but
Yeah.
I know I was there when they started this stuff, which
Yes.
first of all, people were just kind of doing intuitively.
Hmm.
And somebody made it into a curriculum, and now
Yeah.
it's a big assessment tool,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they sell products to assess.
Yeah.
It makes the people a lot of money. And, that's what do to me, it's like that's what makes the world turn, right? These
Yeah.
big, uh,
It's
you're talking
troubling.
about.
It's sad. And I think if educators were given their preferences, they would educators for the most part recognize the power of relationships. And I think we've learned a lot from Reggio Emilia in this respect. They talk about everything in relationship, the environment, the materials, the child, the adults, everything in relationship. And it's true. Everything is intertwined. Everything is in relationship. And a lot of educators recognize that, but often not given the freedom to do what they want to do in their
Right.
classrooms, which is troubling. Um,
I think also in the midst of all of this rules and regulations and people, being marketed or trained or told, here's a way to do something that they seek, help me figure this
yeah,
out.
yeah.
So, and I think it's not easy, right? It's not easy to do this work. You have to really take time to think and study and pause and notice yourself. And uh, yeah, it's
I
very
think
complex.
it's very
I don't
complex.
have
And
any easy answers.
yeah, I wish I had easy answers. People are asking me this question, and you and people like us all the time. They want some answers, and there are no easy answers. They're very complex answers. One of the places that you and I have talked about this, one of the places where really helpful dialogue can take place is in a community of practice. To be with like-minded people, even once a month, whether you are working with toddlers and all the complexity involved in that, or whether you are new and just in survival mode, or whether you're experienced and have something to offer. I find community of practice, that dialogue is incredibly powerful and heartening and um, encourages us in a very, it can be in a formal or an informal way, but I would encourage people to join a community of practice. And I wonder how you feel about that, about the use of communities of practice for educators.
Well, yeah, I've in my work in the world, people invite me to come and do presentations, and
Mm-hmm.
I stopped agreeing to just doing a presentation when
Yeah.
someone would invite me. And I would say, well, you can just pay me for this one day, but let me come the week before.
Yes.
And this is the most powerful PD I've done where I have teachers who want to participate form a small group and I stay in the program for a week and we go to a classroom, a small group of us, and depending on how big the program is, it could be 4 or 5 people one day and a new 4 or 5 people the next day. What we do is we have a focus and we have a little meeting before, and then we go in and the teachers don't have a role with the kids except to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And they collect photos and notes for about an hour. And I always sort of set some guidelines about when you go in there. Um, First of all, notice yourself. This stuff is happening around you. What are you noticing and why? Just think about that for a minute. And what challenges you? Uh, what would you do in those challenges if you were the one in charge here? And what happens when you don't? So that they sort of watch these unfolding things and notice themselves. And then go look for what you love and capture information about that. And then we come back for a couple hours and study what was collected. And then we create a presentation that would have been me just doing it by
Yes.
myself
Yes.
for the whole community on the last day. So, uh, I know it's been useful because I've gone back to places over the years, several times a year, and the same groups of teachers keep being involved. They want to show up. Uh, so that's been a really powerful and, to me, community practice in places where I go to visit. It's a little more difficult in a program where I work because you don't get the time. And even when you
Yeah.
do get the time, there are all these other things
Hmm.
that you have to pay, all these other things.
You
So
have to pay attention to them. Yeah.
I've worked in programs where the leadership created this idea that this is for studying what happens in your group. So I've always tried to play the role of helping that happen. But it's harder in a program because you're kind of like what's the term? A leader in your own land. People don't listen to you.
Mm.
They don't want
That's true. That's
like
absolutely true.
when
When
you
you're,
go in.
yeah,
It's
when you're part of it and you're very familiar with it and everybody knows you, they don't pay as much attention as somebody who's
right,
coming in as
right,
a, yeah. So
exactly.
that's a very extraordinary phenomenon that happens everywhere. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So really what I try to do is bring cool stories about kids and
yeah,
just share like this amazing thing I saw
yeah,
either in the meeting or just right in the moment. Look at
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's because I want that juice with someone else to look at it with me.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so much fun, if you're working with these fascinating toddlers and somebody else from another program is also fascinated by their work with toddlers, to come together and to be excited about that together is a powerful thing.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, we need that. So
Yeah.
anybody out there who is listening, share your stories with someone, share
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
There's got to be another book in here, Deb.
Oh, here I actually am writing one right now about this whole
Good.
relationship thing with
Oh, great.
Nadia, the woman that wrote Children's Lively Minds. This one's going to be
Great.
called Eagerness for Relationships because,
Oh,
I've
wonderful.
been collecting these stories my whole career, right? Or
Yes.
noticing kids do these really
Yes.
lovely, caring, compassionate, spicy, and work their way out of it. That's been part of what I've seen. So
Yeah.
and I've been doing a lot of study of it recently. I've read many amazing books. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Dasher Keltner. He,
No.
oh my gosh, you'll love him.
Write that down. I'll write that down. Yeah. Okay.
Dachherkeltner.
Okay.
He also has a daily or a couple times a week email that he sends called The Greater Good.
Okay.
And yeah, he's amazing. He wrote a book called The Compassionate Instinct and Born to Be Good, where he decided to study human emotion and see sort of across the eons of years of what we know about how people get along and care, and then
Oh,
what we know today. And
we
it's so it's just, I'll go into my nerd talk another time because
we need that right now. We need
anyway,
that. We
and
need
he
that.
also, the other one that just, it's called awe. And he studied the emotion of human awe and what it means to be human and how it helps us get along in the world. And he has these he describes awe as being in the presence of something vast that's larger than yourself. That gives you this amazing feeling. And he has these 8 places where awe happens. And one of them, this is a toddler related one, is called collective effervescence.
Ooh, I like that.
That's when you are with a group of people and you have this incredible connection around something like laughter or like you're singing together or just this group of people. And you see it all the time in toddlers. Just the act of being together is this collective effervescence that just fills them with this amazing feeling of joy and connection. Anyway, that one's good. Ah.
Effervescence is a fantastic word to
Isn't it?
describe
Collective
toddlers.
effort, to get
It
collective
Yes, and
effervescence.
to think about how toddlers live, it's totally an act of effervescence. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that
exactly.
word.
Isn't that good?
Well, Thank you, Deb, so much.
And
Gosh, there's a
I also read another one recently called Humankind.
humankind.
Was again, it's this study of humans from the beginning of time and how we've associated with each other and this big fight between, there's a story of this grandfather. It's supposedly a Cherokee story, but I don't know. It goes around the internet of this grandfather and grandson having a conversation, and the grandson and grandfather are talking about this wolf. And the grandfather says, "Well, there's an angry, mean wolf." And there's a kind, loving wolf, and they're constantly uh, competing with each other inside you. And the
Yes.
grandson says, "Well, which one will win, Grandpa?" And he says, "The one you feed."
Mm,
And that's exactly what the research shows, that
yes.
we have these two amygdalas. I didn't know we had two. I knew
I
about
didn't either. Mm,
one of them. I'll go, never mind. I won't go into the nerd, but that book is good too, called Humankind.
okay.
Gives us some really good things about why anti-bias education is so important uh, at early ages. I mean, it's just fabulous. So
Thank you so much for
I
all of
have
those because
collective
that
effervescence.
gives us a way to sort of move forward. These types of books, which expand our thinking, gives us a way to move forward. And you've given us so much to think about today. So I'm grateful for that. So thanks, Deb, so much. It's always enlightening to talk with you,
Yeah.
always. So
Well, thank you for listening, because
thank
sometimes
you.
people's eyes glaze over because I have too much.
Not with
Too much.
you.
Yeah, they do. I can tell. Can't you tell when people's eyes glaze over? It's like,
Thank you
okay.
so much. And I think we're going to have to do some sort of a follow-up on some of these ideas. So
Okay, I'm
we'll look
happy to
forward
do
to
that.
that.
Well, I'm humbled. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. It was
Enjoyed
fun.
it. And maybe we'll see each other in person again some.
Absolutely.
All
Soon.
right. Thank you for being good Canadian allies. I apologize. I'm sorry, as the Canadians say, sorry.
So yeah, fingers crossed. Thanks, Deb.
Bye.